Good morning. I'm Joe Woodman. I'm your presenter today, and I'll be talking to you about OSHA's new National Enhancement Program, which focuses on improving worker safety in hot environments. I worked in and around hot environments as a paramedic firefighter and technical rescue specialist, and I continue to do so in my present capacity with life and safety, spending time in manufacturing facilities, construction sites, and at utility providers. While I was with EMS, I treated many cases of heat-related issues, and unfortunately, I myself have been taken down by them. I can assure you it's not fun. This is a timely topic, not just because the summer's upon us, but because OSHA and other governmental bodies are focused on this now more than ever. This webinar will help you recognize the need for improving workplace safety in hot environments. It will introduce you to some of the regulations covering worker stress, heat stress. It will present an overview of the new National Enhancement Program on heat issues. It will help you discover ways to be compliant with regulations, and it will briefly mention job site strategies for dealing with the heat. Our focus is primarily on the National Enhancement Program and not on the specifics of heat illnesses and emergencies, although I will talk about them a little bit. Please look over this slide while I talk. I always include a plan slide that shows the path of my presentation so that you can see where I'm going and what will be covered. I don't routinely read all the points listed on my slides, so hopefully you will have been reading along as I talk and you've gotten to the end of the list. Statistics on heat-related injuries and fatalities in the workplace are readily available all over the web and multiple sources. Improved attention to workplace safety and advances in technology have had a positive effect on worker safety, but there's still room for growth. While worker exposure to hot environments can be sudden and unexpected, it is often more predictable and manageable, in my opinion. Attention to this issue is justified, and acting on it is within the means of every employer. While some strategies for dealing with heat are common sense, others may not be as apparent. OSHA points out that in terms of fatalities, 50 to 70% of outdoor fatalities related to heat occur in the first few days of working in warm or hot environments. It seems a large portion of these fatalities are new workers or those who are just returning to the hot environment from an extended leave. A significant contributing factor to this statistic is the lack of worker acclimatization. That means gradually adapting one's body to a hot environment. Heat-related injuries are more common than fatalities, and it turns out are often underreported or miscategorized. In fact, researchers have found some cases of heat-related illness and injury have been documented just as cardiovascular problems, medical problems, or just not labeled as heat-related. There are already multiple regulations at the state and federal level that apply directly and or indirectly to worker safety in hot environments. One of the broadest ones, OSHA's General Duty Clause, is often used to cover issues not otherwise specifically addressed in other regulations. The General Duty Clause says employers are required to provide their employees with a place of employment that is free from recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious harm to employees. That covers a lot of ground. NIOSH and the CDC weigh in and have published criteria for recommended standards for occupational heat stress, including recommendations for employers on how to prevent heat-related illnesses. Additionally, there's a handful of states in the United States that have specific and additional statutes covering worker safety in heat, in conjunction with OSHA rules, including California, Washington, Minnesota, and I've seen recently in the news, Oregon. Finally, there are many related and applicable regulations, including the PPE standard 29 CFR 1910.132D, which requires every employer in general industry to conduct a hazard assessment to determine the appropriate PPE for the hazards in the environment. And there's also standards for medical care and record keeping. But the topic for today is CPL 03-00024, the new National Emphasis Program, covering outdoor and indoor heat-related hazards. This program expands on OSHA's ongoing heat-related illness prevention initiative and campaign by setting forth a targeted enforcement component and reiterating its compliance assistance and outreach efforts. What is a National Emphasis Program? NEPs, National Emphasis Programs, if you didn't know, are temporary programs that focuses OSHA's resources on particular hazards and on high hazard industries. As you can see, multiple NEPs have been issued since 2008. Let's look more closely at the last one. This NEP helps ensure that employees in high hazard industries are protected from heat-related hazards that may lead to serious illnesses, injuries, or death. It goes on to add an enforcement program targeting specific high hazard industries or activities in workplaces where this hazard is prevalent during high heat conditions. It also focuses on protecting vulnerable workers in outdoor and indoor environments by coordinating efforts with the Department of Labor, Wage, and Hour Division. This new program sets specific strategies for identifying and handling workplaces where workers have not been provided adequate protection, including cool water, rest, cooling areas, training, and the opportunity to acclimatize. Now, OSHA's been historically involved in finding and addressing workplace safety issues in the past related to heat, but this new NEP document states that OSHA-related inspections have accounted for 0.5% of all federal inspections during the last 5 years, and says that the fiscal year goal for each OSHA region moving forward is to increase their heat inspections by 100% above the baseline average from 2017 to 2021. So they want more inspection. Inspectors will also increase follow-up inspections of work sites previously inspected for heat-related hazards. Specifically, inspectors are encouraged to look for hazardous heat conditions while performing any investigation. It does not have to be related. They are to actively look for heat-related safety problems by examining OSHA logs, incident reports, and even to make direct observations, and can use information gained by collaboration with other agencies. Inspectors will ask about specific hazard control efforts on heat priority days and shall schedule inspection days when the National Weather Service has announced a heat warning or advisory for the local area. Like many regulations, there are some exemptions for the NEP for small employers, but those small employers are still likely covered by multiple regulations already in existence. Primary focus of this NEP is to target industries where heat issues are prevalent, and as such, it offers direction to inspectors on how to do this. It states that reasons for targeting establishments must include neutral and objective selection criteria, and it goes on to list additional reasons for and ways to obtain information on workplace safety issues. Targeting is one prong of this two-pronged strategy. The other prong is using past reports and citations as indicators for a need to revisit. There's an appendix in the NEP that lists target industries who have had high incidence of heat-related problems or who are involved in high heat operations, and I encourage you to look at that. While conducting a heat-related inspection, inspectors are to look over general injury logs, incident reports, and any records that indicate a heat-related emergency room visit or ambulance transport, even if hospitalization did not occur. They may also interview workers in order to look for heat-related symptoms and/or problems, especially considering new employees and any employees who have recently returned to work. Inspectors will ask if the employer has a heat illness and injury prevention program. They will consider the following. How did the employer monitor ambient temperatures and levels of work exertion at the worksite? Was there unlimited cool water that was easily accessible to the employees? Did the employer require additional breaks for hydration? Were there scheduled rest breaks? Was there access to shaded or cool areas? Did the employer provide time for acclimatization of new and returning workers? Was there a buddy system in place for hot days? Were administrative controls, such as earlier start times and employee job rotation, used to limit heat exposure? Finally, did the employer provide training on heat illness signs, how to report signs and symptoms, first aid, how to contact emergency personnel, prevention, and the importance of hydration? The NEP document thoroughly outlines OSHA's goals, expectations, and actions. It's something each employer, especially those employers in targeted industries, must become familiar with. One could consider it OSHA's declaration of war against workplace heat-related worker injury and death. To us, employers and safety professionals, it represents an opportunity to focus on and address workplace heat safety issues, while it clearly states what OSHA expects and what they will do. The phrase due diligence is one that often comes up when dealing with OSHA. Due diligence, demonstrating effort and action to address legal or procedural matters when conducting business, helps show that an employer cares about and is on board with whatever program or projects being discussed. Proactively addressing issues, educating employees, and developing and implementing policies to handle problems are all examples of this. In terms of this NEP and heat-related problems, creating a heat illness prevention plan is a great example of due diligence and is, in fact, required. A heat illness prevention plan should address the following. Who will provide oversight on a daily basis? How will new workers gradually develop heat tolerance? How will the employer ensure that first aid is adequate and assure that the protocol for summoning medical assistance in situations beyond first aid is effective? What engineering controls and work practices will be used to reduce heat stress? How will heat stress be measured? We respond when the National Weather Service issues a heat advisory or heat warning. Will the employer determine if the total heat stress is hazardous, and how will they do so? And what training will be provided to workers and supervisors? Much of this presentation so far has covered policy and procedure, and we can only get so far into that in the time we have. I have time to spend a few minutes talking about practical solutions and tactics. I borrowed this graphic from a CDC document to help illustrate some useful techniques. Much of this could be considered common sense, but they say common sense is not that common, so let's look at some specifics. Easing workers into hot environments gradually helps prevent heat injury. Remember, new workers and temporary or returning workers are some of the most frequently injured or killed by heat issues. Adequate water intake is critical. Keeping up with the body's use and demand for hydration is a priority. Workers should stay away from caffeinated and sugary drinks, and when sports drinks are used, they should consider diluting them as needed. More frequent rest breaks in cooler or shaded areas help reduce heat stress when significant heat is present. Proper attire has a big impact on heat tolerance. Clothes that breathe and wick moisture away from the skin are helpful. And of course, since COVID's arrived and made all of our lives more difficult, we have to consider how facial coverings affect us in hot environments. According to one article I read, about 7% of your body heat is removed by evaporation from airways inside and outside the lungs. 11 ounces of water a day are lost as water vapor that you exhale, and 3% of body heat is lost when inspired air is heated by the body. Facial coverings can make this process less efficient, especially if they become saturated with sweat or water. High heat conditions might necessitate regularly changing out facial coverings. Some of the manufacturing sites I've visited while working with life and safety have gotten pretty creative with their efforts to keep workers cool. Among other things, I've seen freezers with free frozen products, freezer pops, etc., in employee break rooms, freezers for holding cooling vests for those who have to go into heavy protective equipment, misting fans, and water coolers liberally placed throughout the facilities are good examples. And of course, the most common method, keeping air moving by using fans, is nearly everywhere. First aid for heat-related emergencies is pretty simple. The patient needs to be removed from the dangerous environment or moved to a safer place. Their body temperature needs to be appropriately reduced, and they may need further medical care or transportation to a healthcare facility. Now, this is an extreme simplification, but in essence, that's the rule for dealing with heat-related problems. This is a good time to mention that people who have experienced heat-related injuries in the past are more likely to have heat problems in the future and are more vulnerable to heat extremes. So be cautious when introducing workers who have had heat-related problems back into hot environments. Speaking of vulnerable workers, this graphic was one of the best I've seen for representing the associated risk factors that make heat issues more significant. Each of these factors alone can make heat exposure harder on a worker. But if and when these factors combined, you can be assured that a harmful outcome is more likely. As you can see, medications, pre-existing conditions, age, hydration status, obesity, all these things can weave together and give a really serious 1-2 punch to somebody who's already behind the 8 ball when they're operating in hot weather. So is it too hot? What is too hot? Exactly when do we intervene and in what conditions? We're going to jump in the weeds here for a minute and look at a table from OSHA's Heat Exposure Guidelines webpage. I included here to show the calculations and considerations that go into figuring out whether a hot environment is potentially dangerous and what the danger level is, but you may not have to go that far. First, it mentions something called a WBGT. The wet bulb globe temperature is a measurement of heat stress in direct sunlight, which considers temperature, humidity, wind speed, sun angle, and cloud cover. This differs from a simple heat index, which takes into consideration temperature and humidity and is calculated in shady areas. If you work or exercise in direct sunlight, the WBGT gives a more accurate representation of conditions. Now, there are online tools that can help you estimate the WBGT, and I've included a link at the end of this presentation for that. This table shows recommendations for both unacclimatized and acclimatized workers at different heat levels. And you can see that their acclimatization status affects how resilient they may be in a hot environment. So you don't necessarily have to get this deep into measurement, calculation, and science to be able to determine safe work levels for workers, but the methodology exists, and it may help you convince decision makers above you why time and money may need to be spent to address heat issues. Resources like websites and online research materials abound when it comes to weather forecasting, workplace safety in hot environments, and measurement tools. One recent addition to that offers a convenient and rapid way to assess heat indexes in your area, and that's OSHA's free Heat app, which is available for both Android and Apple devices. A screenshot of that is shown on the right side of your screen. It uses the device's location services to determine a user's local temperature and humidity levels, and then it displays a heat index graphic and a feels-like temperature, along with specific recommendations for dealing with that level of heat. This is a handy and convenient tool for site supervisors and workers who move about geographically, but it is geared toward outdoor exposure. Indoor heat indexes can be calculated and looked up using other means. I thought I'd finish with a slide showing penalties for noncompliance. OSHA's ability to issue citations and fines is well known. Here are some typical numbers for cited violations so you can see the potential financial impact. These civil penalties are divided into levels of severity, and you can see that repeat violations and failure to fix problems identified in citations become significantly more expensive. This concludes the presentation portion of this webinar. While I'm not an attorney or an OSHA representative, and I think there's more for me to learn in this area, I hope my summary of this new program and the information I've offered helps you identify and resolve heat-related challenges in your particular line of work. We are always available for further discussion or problem solving if you'd like to reach out by phone or email. And please look over the reference links I'll put up on screen next during the question and answer period. I'm now going to turn the mic back to Nathan.
All right. Thank you so much, Joe. That was fantastic information. One question I did have, you had on, I think it was 2 slides ago, you were talking about the different violations, the different amounts that OSHA could assess of a company. If someone is fined or receives a fine, is that the amount that the company ends up paying? Well, what I'm getting at is there a way to either mitigate, reduce, or remove those fines in some cases, specifically with this heat stress, or just in general?
As I understand it, there are ways to discuss with OSHA the citation and the fines, perhaps involving safety professionals to help you develop a proper response or a prevention program. I do understand that exists, but I have not gotten that far into this. If someone on board knows and would like to contribute that answer for the rest of the group, I encourage you to step forward, put it in the comments.
you just need to schedule it.
I actually have our illustrious leaders actually here in the
He
room
can
with me.
I wouldn't use that word illustrious. I don't like illustrious. Like, how about just Don Snazowski?
Don Snazaski is here with us, and he just told me one of the things you can do is be sure to schedule an informal conference to discuss any findings with the OSHA representative, and that would be the first step in potentially reducing, removing, or in some way mitigating any of those fines that you received.
Thank you, sir.